Welcome to my mommy's podcast.
This episode is sponsored by Crunchy Betty products. Here's a secret. While I have a post about making my own deodorant, I haven't actually done that in a couple of years because I found Crunchy Betty Kokomo Cream Deodorant, and I realized it works just as well, it doesn't cause irritation, and it's made by a small family business that I love to support. This deodorant smells like the tropics, and one small jar lasts for months, so it reduces packaging. I love that it uses this minimal recyclable packaging, and because it lasts so long, there's virtually no waste. For me, this deodorant completely stops any odor, keeps me fresh all day, even on heavy workout days. So many natural deodorants cause irritation, and this one doesn't. If you love tropical smells, and if you've been looking for a natural deodorant, you have got to check it out. There's two ways to order. You can check it out on Etsy by going to etsy.com/shop/Crunchy Betty, or on Amazon by going to crunchybetty.com/Wellness Mama. So again, that's CRUNCHYBETTY.com/Wellness Mama. This episode is sponsored by Just Thrive Probiotics. I found this company when searching for the most research-backed and effective probiotic available, and I was blown away at the difference I found in their products. They offer two cornerstone products that are both clinically studied and highly effective. The first is their probiotic, which has been studied to help with leaky gut and to survive up to 1,000 times as much as other probiotics, or as the beneficial organisms in something like Greek yogurt, for instance. The difference is their spore-based strains work completely differently than other types of probiotics. Their probiotic is vegan, dairy-free, histamine-free, non-GMO, and is made without soy, dairy, sugar, salt, corn, tree nuts, or gluten. So it's safe for practically everyone. I even sprinkle it in my kids' food or bake it into products because it can survive at really high temperatures. Their probiotic contains a patented strain called Bacillus indicus HU36, which produces antioxidants in the digestive system where they can be easily absorbed by the body. Their other product is a K2-7, and this is a nutrient you may have heard of. It's known as Activator X, a super nutrient that Weston A. Price, a dentist known primarily for his theories on the relationship between nutrition, good health, bone development, and oral health, found. He found that this is prevalent in foods in the healthiest communities in the world. The K2 from Just Thrive is the only pharmaceutical grade all-natural supplement with published safety studies. Like the probiotic, it is also gluten, dairy, soy, nut, and GMO free, and best are both taken with food, so I keep both on my kitchen table. Here's a tip too. My dad has trouble remembering to take supplements, so he actually taped these to his pepper shaker because he uses that at practically every meal, and now they're on his daily supplement list as well. You can check out all their products and learn more by going to thriveprobiotic.com/Wellness Mama and using the code WellnessMama15 to save 15%. So again, that's Thrive Probiotic, THRIVEPROBIOTIC.com/Wellness Mama and the code WellnessMama15 to save 15%. Hello and welcome to the Wellness Mama podcast. I'm Katie from wellnessmama.com, and today's guest is a powerhouse and a wealth of information, and she's also one of my favorite people to follow on Instagram. Dr. Amy Shah, MD, is a double board certified medical doctor who trained at Grinnell, Harvard, and Columbia. She runs her own thriving medical practice in Arizona. She's worked as a medical consultant with Bobbi Brown, the makeup guru, to develop a line of innovative health foods and supplements. And she's also a key medical advisor for a company that I love, Genexa, which is the first natural pharmaceutical company, and Viome, as well as many other leading wellness companies. We're going to deep dive into childhood allergies, gut health, hormones, and so much more. I love talking to her. Dr. Amy, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Katie. I love talking to you too.
Oh my gosh, likewise. And I know that you have a background and a lot of experience in immunology and childhood allergies. So I'd love to start there and kind of do a deep dive into why are allergies in children becoming so prevalent? They seem like they're definitely on the rise. Any idea what the cause is?
Yeah, Katie. 1 in 5 children in industrialized countries suffer from allergic disease or autoimmune disease, and this is rising. Every 10 years, it's doubling in incidence, especially as countries are becoming more developed, which is so strange, right? Because you think as we become cleaner and more developed and more advanced that we should have less diseases, not more. But we think there's a change in our lifestyle that's actually stimulating the rise of autoimmune, allergy, asthma, and all kinds of other inflammatory diseases. So it was first found at the turn of the century in London. There was a scientist by the name of Strachan who said, hey, that's interesting. All these children who are moving into London because of industrial revolution, around the 1900s, they were starting to get all these diseases, asthma, allergies, autoimmune diseases. However, the children who stayed on the farms did not have such a high incidence. And that was his observation. And then he did a study on 17,000 British children. And he found that to be true, that the children that lived on farms had larger families, had more exposure, presumably to animals, dirt. They were having less allergies, asthma, and autoimmune disease. And so that's when this hygiene hypothesis was born. And that is still the leading, thought process on why we have such a huge rise in autoimmune, inflammatory, and allergic diseases in our modern world.
That makes sense. And it's sad to see. Do you think, what are some of the surprising things in our environment that you think might really be contributing to this? Because I've written about it some, and I have my own theories, but you obviously have the research and clinical side. So I'd love your take.
There have been so many studies looking at, early antibiotic use in children. Of course, you can blame antimicrobials as a huge cause for this. What happens is when our immune system is not stimulated enough as a child, especially from the ages from 0 to 5, we end up making autoimmune to our own body. So we think that we need that stimulation from being exposed to bacteria. And bacteria can come in the form of animal exposure, in the form of little bits of dirt from the food that we eat. It can be from bacteria from other family members. So we found that larger family sizes, people who are exposed to more people, people who share food, people who come from families that have larger households and also animals, they tend to have better immune systems than children who are in a very nuclear setting with very clean environment. So I can definitely say that some of these things that we think we're so advanced about are actually hurting our immune system. I would say, for example, when my children were little, I was living in New York City, and I was pretty cavalier about, taking them to the park and letting them crawl around and get exposure. Obviously not on the city streets, but in the park where, we felt comfortable letting them loose, being exposed to animals, sharing food with them. That was all a big part of what we think can bolster a healthy immune system.
Which, yeah, that makes total sense when you think about it. And I've read even of some cultures where in the early years, the mom pre-chews the food and gives it to the kid, which Americans tend to cringe at the thought, but it makes sense. There's a bacterial transfer. There's all these enzymes in the mouth plus bacteria that then get passed on to the baby. And I feel like there was a shift at some point, or at least in cities and more modernized world, where bacteria became a bad thing. And we've started to shift that a little bit in our understanding of probiotics and how there are beneficial bacteria. But I still feel like sometimes the perception is that bacteria are bad, when largely we have so much bacteria in our own bodies that they're a vital part of life for us. I know a couple of years ago, I saw a lot of news come out about how triclosan, an ingredient in a lot of antibacterial soaps, for instance, had been banned. And it brought up all these questions about, do we need antibacterial soaps, and kind of questioning that, hygiene hypothesis. So how do you handle that both as a mom and a doctor? Because obviously we want to be clean and have good hygiene, but the bacteria side is so important too.
Exactly. The reason I got interested in immunology is because of this conundrum that we're in at this point in the stage of development. Of course, in our ICUs and our hospitals, especially as a healthcare professional, I'm keenly aware that you need to sanitize, and you have to make sure that you're not spreading bacteria from one sick individual to another. So there's two things going on here. One is, increased sanitation and careful measures in the hospital setting where people are sick. And then there's this other conundrum where, hey, but what about when you're not sick, when you're at home and living in your own home? Do you really need all these antibacterial soaps and cleaners? And my answer is no. If you are not sick or your family members are not sick, then that's an opportunity for you to foster your microbiome and really take in. So if you have a garden in your backyard, like we do, we have a small garden, and if you use the vegetables from there, you are getting a little bit of bacteria from the garden, especially if you're not washing with an antibacterial soap. And so little measures like that, when you are healthy and living in a place where you have the opportunity to have a little more bacteria in your life, I think you should welcome it. And the same thing with animals or sharing food with your healthy family members. But of course, there is a conundrum, because when you're in the healthcare setting and when you're dealing with very ill patients, you have to be careful about not transferring bacteria from person to person.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely use some caution in how you do that, but it makes sense that we all need that exposure. And I feel like those are some easy tips. It was one of the points I used when I was trying to convince my husband that we should get a dog, is I'm like, it's great for the kids' immune system study. There are studies that, children who have pets, and we used to also live near an Amish community. And of course, there's been a lot of things written about how they tend to have lower rates of allergies and also things like autism and ADD. And I think there's a lot of things that could be in combination that could contribute to that. But having been out there, I also think they do so much better about getting dirty than we do. Like, those babies are with their moms in the field playing when they're in the dirt and eating the dirt and playing with animals and eating strawberries right off the plant and just interacting with that bacterial environment.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect point. I think the Amish communities, as well as many communities in the developing world, are teaching us some lessons in the fact that we don't have it all figured out. And I think we all know, and I know that there's a lot of things in medicine that we still have not figured out. And immunology and the development of the immune system is an area that's super interesting because of the new discoveries of the microbiome, because we are realizing, hey, maybe this is an area that we can really develop and change and influence in people that can make a sizable difference in their long-term health. So it's extremely exciting area for me, although we don't really have all the data on exactly what we should be doing. All of the things that we've been talking about are kind of like presumptuous based on the research and not necessarily things that are proven.
That makes sense. And so I know I have a lot of personal friends who have children with food allergies, and obviously it can be very scary, especially if those are life-threatening food allergies. And likely many of our listeners today have a child with food allergies or know a child with food allergies. So other than the food itself, are there other things that those parents need to be concerned with to help their children?
So children with food allergies, it's a very, very changing field right now, because we're finding out we completely switched our recommendations. In the past, even when I was first in training, there was this recommendation that you shouldn't have your newborn children, up to the age of 1 or 2 having exposure to certain allergens such as nuts and peanuts and tree nuts. And then we realize, okay, there's countries like Israel where the first teething food at 3 or 4 months, called a bomba snack, has peanut flour in it. And that country had a super low rate of food allergies, especially peanut allergy. So now, and then the studies corroborated this. So now the whole recommendation is completely flipped. And we are saying, hey, the more you can expose your children to new foods, whether you're breastfeeding or feeding them, their first foods or chewing crackers, all that stuff, you should be incorporating all kinds of foods, which makes sense. All kinds of foods, different variations. As soon as they have their first kind of rice cereal, then you should start to incorporate any kind of allergenic foods into their diet. So I think that besides exposing them to all kinds of foods, I also think that it's really important to expose them to all kinds of bacteria, like healthy bacteria, like we mentioned, animal exposure to healthy other family members, friends, people who can give them different sources of bacteria, having them play outside, like we mentioned, in kind of a field or a farm or just your backyard where you're not spraying all kinds of chemicals on your grass, and really having them be exposed to natural forms of bacteria, not necessarily infecting them with bacterial, infections per se, but really having them get down and dirty.
Yeah. And I know also, as a side note, with the rise in other childhood diseases and obesity, it's another great excuse to get kids outside, get them moving, get them sunshine, and just interacting with the environment. And that brings up another question that I would love to get your take on, which is, I feel like a lot of parents view kids getting the occasional sniffles or cold when they're little as a bad thing, or like they're doing something wrong as a parent. They need to clean, sterilize more, or they're just so quick to treat those little illnesses. And I've always taken the opposite approach, thinking like the immune system has to develop. So they're going to get sick a certain number of times anyway. It's good if it's mild, but their body needs to learn how to interact with that. And I know as an adult having an autoimmune disease, I've studied that in depth because I think that was maybe one thing that contributed to mine. But I'm curious, like as a doctor and a mom, how do you look at it when kids get sick, especially in those early years when they're still developing their immune system?
You're absolutely right. I think that they need that immune stimulation. I mean, we know that they need that immune stimulation. And like I said, the leading thought processes on why autoimmune diseases are on the rise, as you mentioned for yourself, is that maybe we did not get enough immune stimulation as children. And it's not to say that we purposely infect our children, but if they do get sick in a natural way, then you not necessarily foster that, but don't get scared and don't get worried. Don't over sanitize. It's really a part of childhood immune system development. In fact, this is pretty extreme, but there's, I don't know if you heard about this guy who was infecting himself with hookworm because parasitic diseases especially seem to really protect against allergic and autoimmune diseases later in life. And, obviously we don't want to be doing that until we have really robust studies, but there is some idea that, parasitic stimulation, especially as in children, even as adults, can really decrease the incidence of autoimmune and allergic diseases.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because I have some extended family members who have been in the kind of health world for decades, and they're older now, but they have been for years and years on this kick of we need to do all these hardcore cleanses and kill any potential parasites in our body. And I always just was hesitant and never really got on that bandwagon because I was like, people have lived much more in connection with the environment and animals than we do now. And people like Amish kids walk around barefoot all the time in manure. And, kids have been exposed to many more parasites than we currently are. And people weren't dying in droves from that. So what if they're like bacteria? What if there's some kind of reason or like purpose that these things can exist at times? And maybe we should be a little more cautious about just, killing all of them.
Exactly. And now, you know very well, and I do too, with the robust microbiome research and all these new discoveries that we're finding out, I think more is better. Of course, we have to couch that with, how much more is better and that's why I say really do it naturally, like, go out and play and get sun exposure and get nature exposure. It has so many other benefits, like you mentioned, beyond improving your microbiome. We have a circadian clock in every one of our cells, and having that morning sunlight and that evening darkness, in nature can really, really help our health in so many other ways than just the microbiome. But so I think doing it naturally and having it come naturally is probably the best bet at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I often think of that small study that came out a few years ago that found that basically camping outside away from all artificial light and phones and whatever for 7 days was enough to totally reset the circadian rhythm of the body. And I haven't gotten brave enough to take 6 kids camping for 7 days, but it's really astounding just what light and nature can do to us if we let it.
A few years ago, my husband and I went to Costa Rica, and we stayed at this eco resort on the river where there was no electricity. The only electricity they had is in the main kitchen cabin, where they had a source of independent electricity. But I have to say that 7 days being out in nature, eating only the food from that campsite, eating, being outdoors, my sleep and my energy levels were never better. I highly recommend everybody do that at least once in the next couple of years to see how good you can feel.
Yeah, definitely. Even just shorter camping trips, you do sleep so well when you're just out in nature. And on the note of kids getting sick, I'd also like to go deep a little bit on fevers, because I feel like so many moms, and I get it, it's so scary when your kid gets a fever, especially a high fever. And so many moms are quick to jump in with any fever, 99.5, start giving Tylenol or start giving Motrin. And I've also always taken a controversial approach on that, where I don't fight fevers unless there's an extreme reason to fight fevers. But I'd love to actually get the doctor's side on this, because that's just always what has been my intuition as a mom and what's worked for me. But I'd love to hear from you on that.
I mean, as you are a mom of 6 kids, so you know that low-grade fevers are quite common and quite a big part of a upper respiratory infection, cold-like symptoms. And I completely agree with you. In fact, I do the same thing with my children. I do not give them any kind of ibuprofen, Tylenol, Motrin products unless there is another reason to do that, or if the fever is really super high, 104 and above. But for most fevers, that is a natural inflammatory response by your body to mobilize your immune system to come and help fight this infection. It's actually a natural part of our fighting response. And by taking these medications, not only are you adding these toxin-laden medications into your body, but you're also maybe blunting that immune response.
Yeah, that's what's always felt right to me. And I am much more that's one of the only times I'll let my kids watch movies. And that's how I get them through, like a fever if they're uncomfortable, is I'll like put a movie they like, give them lots of liquids and, not too much solid food, just rehydrate them, keep them warm, let the fever do its job. And typically, I think so many times kids' bodies are amazingly resilient, adults too, but kids are just phenomenal. And they can bounce back so quickly if you just let their body run its course. And in fact, as an adult, I've kind of tried to learn from that. So I think kids get better fevers. I'm a little jealous actually how much better fevers they can get and how they get better quicker. So if I start feeling an illness coming on, I will get in a sauna and purposely try to raise my body temperature and give myself a little bit of a fever. And it seems like it really does stop illnesses from coming on. Is there any actual science behind that, or is it just in my head?
Yeah, no, but the whole response of, raising your body temperature is to immobilize this immune response in your body, to kind of go, mobilize all the lymph nodes. And so, as you know, being in a sauna is a really great way of cleaning out those lymph nodes. And so I think that there's no doubt, and also a great way of getting rid of toxins through your sweat. So no doubt for me that sweating it out is a really great way to deal with, especially a virus or, an upper respiratory infection. And I think that, when I was studying immunology, I was so shocked that sleep and gut rest is still studied. I mean, that is the top 2 things that you could be doing for your body, sleep and gut rest, for just like you're saying for your kids, really maximizing those things and not relying on all these external medications to help fight this virus or illness is the way to go. I think that all these things that we talk about, to help with colds and viruses and are all great, but nothing really trumps sleep and gut rest. And I do love the idea of saunas. I do hot yoga myself, and I feel like the benefits of sweating out the toxins and mobilizing the lymphatic flow and sweating out those toxins is really unparalleled.
Yeah, I definitely agree based on my own experience for sure. And I want to move on to a couple other topics, but before we do, I'd love it if you have any tips for natural remedies for mom. We've shared a lot as far as I think sleep and gut health is probably nothing can trump that for sure. But moms who have kids with minor childhood issues. I know that you also are the medical advisor for a company I love, Genexa, and they make a lot of remedies. So we can maybe touch on a couple of those, but any remedies you recommend for moms, even if it's not to bring the fever down, but just to help the child recover or be more comfortable?
Yeah, I love Genexa, and I know you do too, because I think we don't realize that when we treat all these things, for example, when children get hurt and, you said, oh, icy hot, that should be not a big deal. You're rubbing it on the skin. But I did not know that these kind of commercial medications have all kinds of formaldehyde releasing chemicals, DMDM, hydantoin. It has colors and fragrances and all these things. And when we put things on the skin, it's literally absorbed right into the bloodstream. And with children, you really worry about that because they're getting a larger dose than we are. So, for example, there is a nasal saline that Genexa makes that doesn't have parabens. And if you think about it, we have become so careful about not having hormone disruptors in our adult life by using, natural cosmetics or shampoo and blah, blah. But then when our children are sick and we're using these nasal saline products, a lot of them, or most of them, contain parabens and all these other kind of binders that are hormone disrupting. So I am so excited that there are companies like Genexa that are changing the game, that are really saying, okay, why don't we create some easy remedies? For example, nasal saline, that's something that I highly recommend for babies, especially, and infants who cannot be taking lots of other medications to kind of dehumidify their nose and kind of help them drain out all the mucus when they can't sleep well and breathe well from their nose. And can you imagine giving these babies a nasal saline that is laden with parabens and other toxins the way we've been doing it for many years now?
Especially, right next to their brain. It blows my mind. I didn't know that either. Like, I've been using natural everything for years. And when I started researching like what's in even just like natural remedies and medicines, I was shocked.
And it's crazy that only 10% of most medications are the actual active ingredient. Once I started working with Genexa, I was like, I had no idea that all these things like Tums, for example, just over the counter, things that we give to pregnant women, okay, all the time for, minor heartburn issues. These are only 10% the active ingredient calcium carbonate. The rest, 90%, is fillers and stabilizers and colors and flavors and sweeteners and all kinds of toxins that we're giving to people who are carrying a developing fetus. It's really scary. So, there's a lot of change coming on and lots of companies that are doing amazing things. So Genexa actually has an alternative that's called, I think, Heartburn Fix, and that does not have any colors and flavors and sugar, artificial, anything. And so what you are getting is a minor heartburn relief if, you're suffering from that, which unfortunately, no matter how healthy and clean I eat, sometimes I do have minor heartburn issues, and I do use that.
Yeah, for sure. And I also love, before we move on, just a quick tip, they have these great little like homeopathic tablets as well. And I feel like those are enough to satisfy my kids, especially if they're like, I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm like, oh, here's a sleeping one. And then I think the combination of the homeopathic plus they think they're getting something that's going to put them to sleep. So they go to sleep is amazing. So as a mom tip, those are great as well. I know that you also have expertise in a lot of areas. You're double board certified, but you also have a lot of expertise in gut health. So I'd love if you could walk us through just what you see as a doctor, some of the biggest challenges in today's world for people with like in the gut health department and what we can do about it.
Exactly. Gut health is probably the number one thing that I hear about day in, day out. For example, people who have newfound food allergies or sensitivities, people who have bloating on a regular basis, people who feel fatigue, people who feel kind of fogginess in their concentration, brain fog, or whatever you might want to call it. Those three things are often because of your gut health. And you think that, having, not having clear concentration has nothing to do with your gut. Also, your mood has so much to do with your gut. So by improving your gut, you can improve your energy. You can improve the way, obviously, how bloated you are. You can improve your concentration and you can improve your mood. As you know, so much of 80% of your serotonin is made in the gut, and your immune system is largely located in your GI tract. What's happening is every time you eat any food, there is a large conversation happening between the bacteria that are present in your gut, and they're talking to your cells in your body. So there's this conversation going on between the bacteria in your gut and the cells of your own body. And they're all deciding, hey, is this foreign? Is this good? Should we take out some of the B vitamins from this, the D vitamins? And they're each and every thing you eat, there is a decision being made whether to absorb this kind of food or whether to keep it in the gut as waste, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes sense then why you want a robust amount of bacteria in your gut that's able to do this communication with your own cells. And it makes sense that taking antibiotics will completely mess up this communication method, and this whole tight system of checks and balances and conversations that's going on with your immune system will be off when you're eating irritants, when you're taking antibiotics, when you're using ibuprofen, when you're using antacids, and a host of other preservatives and toxins can really throw off this balance. And if you're imbalanced, then you have food sensitivities and allergies that you never had before. You have bloating, you have mood issues, you have problems with concentration, fatigue, and lots of other diseases.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're learning just so much more and more. And I'm a nerd who browses PubMed, but there's so many studies that come out constantly about gut health and the different bacteria. And maybe we will never completely understand every intricacy of that, but it's just fascinating to know like what an incredible job our gut does. And I think one thing it's related to that you're also an expert in is hormone balance and hormones, because, you know, so much of that is related to the food we eat or to factors in the gut. And it's something that so many women struggle with. So do you have any tips for women who are struggling to balance hormones, maybe especially postpartum or just with like menstrual issues in general?
Absolutely. I think that hormone imbalance is a huge problem in our current society, because I think that people don't realize that when you're stressed out all the time and you're making cortisol, making adrenaline, which is good, right? You want that fight or flight response at certain times in your life. However, you don't want a chronic stress response when you're trying to make cortisol all the time, adrenaline all the time. You're actually stealing from the, creation of other hormones, and you're creating a hormone imbalance. So not only are you, having a fight or flight response and chronic stress, creating all kinds of other hormonal problems, you're actually stealing from your other hormones. So you'll get low progesterone and an estrogen progesterone imbalance just from this chronic stress response. So I think it's really important for postpartum women, for moms, for women that are going through perimenopause to really take control of that stress. And I think that stress can come in many ways. It's just not mental stress. It's also stress on our GI tracts and stress on our bodies as exercise and, poor sleep. And so really cleaning up the sleep, the exercise, the mental stress, and the food is key to hormonal imbalance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key to so much else as well. There's a few more topics I want to touch on with you, but I also realized I forgot to ask you one of the most important questions related to kids getting sick that I think you have a great perspective on, which is antibiotic use, because I also see so many moms who that's the first line of defense. If the kid has an ear infection, has anything, they want antibiotics. And I 100% understand wanting to help your child when they're uncomfortable or in pain, especially. But from the doctor side and the immunology side, how do moms evaluate when to give antibiotics and when to hold off?
Great question, Katie. I think that I'll give you a story. I was I usually don't visit any kind of healthcare entities because I'm a physician myself. But when I was traveling to India this December, we were going to India and Singapore. And so we thought it was important to get some special endemic vaccines like typhoid, fever, et cetera, Hep A. And we were waiting there, and there was a mom who was extremely upset with the provider there and saying, I need antibiotics for my son. You did not do anything for him. All you told him is to get rest and drink water, and that's not right. And he's been dealing with this for over 2 weeks now. And it's just, it was so enlightening for me, because I know, when we're speaking to each other and speaking to the choir, it's like, yeah, we all know that we want to save antibiotics for the very last resort, but there's so much. As a mom, you want to do so much for your child. And I can understand the frustration in her voice. She was like, you're telling me that you cannot do anything for him at this moment in time. And, but I think that what he was trying to make her understand, and I helped him, is that there is no cure for the common cold or for most viruses. In fact, most illnesses, 85% of all childhood illnesses are viral. And so when you're talking about ear infections, you're talking about sinus, you're talking about cold, even GI bugs, these are all viral illnesses, which antibiotics do not treat. And so I think that the big thing to take home here is 85% and probably 95% of the time, you don't need to be taking antibiotics for the child's illness. And I think that if you take that into consideration, I would wait at least a week before approaching the physician if it is typical symptoms of a cold or a virus, with a low-grade fever, muscle aches, and fatigue, and upper respiratory symptoms. Of course, if you're not sure, you can ask your doctor, but I think that there has to be more knowledge out there. That I know it's frustrating that there's no absolute one-shot solution to these childhood illnesses. But I think Katie, it's just a part of growing up. You have to be okay with them being sick sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And back to your point about, sleep and gut rest, that sometimes that is the most effective way. And especially if we're not giving kids sugar or, sugary drinks or processed foods and just letting their body rest. I think that's another common misconception with kids, is that they need to eat absolutely like 3 to 6 times a day. And it's, if they don't, that like you worry about it. And I've taken the opposite approach with that, both with my kids and myself. If I want them to actually really listen to their body and not eat if they're not hungry, but especially when they're sick. Most kids aren't that hungry when they're sick. So we just do a lot of herbal teas and gentle things and let them rest. And it seems to work. And I've never had a kid actually need antibiotics, and I have 6 of them. So I think there's so much wisdom to that approach. And I'm curious too, I know that from your Instagram that you intermittent fast. And so the gut rest seems like it kind of lines up with that, because anytime we're not having to expend all this energy for digestion, our body can use it somewhere else. But talk to us a little bit about the benefits of intermittent fasting or regular fasting and how that can benefit the body.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of intermittent fasting. There's a few reasons. Every cell in our body has a circadian clock. So you've probably heard about circadian rhythms and, helping with sleep and energy and all that stuff. But there's also a timing in each one of our cells. Our metabolism is just more active during the sunlight hours, for example. And so the type of intermittent fasting that I propose and that I do myself is to, it's kind of in the literature called time-restricted eating or time-restricted feeding when it's animal studies, which is basically eating within the hours of, say, 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. and then limiting the amount of hours. So doing say 11 hours of eating and then 13 hours of fasting. And then there would be certain days of the week. For me, it's about 2 days a week where I extend that a little bit more to maybe 16 or 18 hours of fasting. And the reason I do time-restricted eating is because of the circadian biology. So what happens is, our body cannot be doing many, many metabolic processes all at the same time, which makes sense. So there are certain times of the day and night where our digestion processes, our metabolic processes are turned down. And those seem to be, for almost everyone, preserved among over 90% of people, 95% of people at the same times, kind of in the nighttime hours. And then during the daytime hours, our body's optimized to be digesting and metabolically active. And so that's a great time to eat. So not only is it giving our body a metabolic boost, but I do it because our body gets a time to rest between meals. So what I do typically is stop eating at around 6 p.m. and then don't eat again until 7 a.m. And that's something that I do maybe 5 days a week. And then 2 days a week, I actually extend that to about 16 hours to get the additional autophagy benefits. Autophagy is a clean out of the cell, and that happens with a little bit longer fasts.
Yeah, and I get so many questions about specifically fasting for women. I think that's been a somewhat controversial topic in the last couple of years because intermittent fasting gained popularity. And then there were these kind of counter articles saying it's not good for women at all. And I haven't actually found any scientific literature on why, especially intermittent fasting, isn't good for women. Because when I hear people say like, oh, I could never fast, I get low blood sugar. I'm like, but you fast every night when you're asleep. You kind of do it anyway. You're just talking about extending essentially your sleep window with intermittent fasting. But do you think there are any concerns specific to women when it comes to fasting?
Absolutely. It's a fact that women are wired to be more sensitive to fasting than men are. And some people ask me, well, I'm a woman and I have no problems with, extended fasting. And I think, Katie, you're maybe one of them. But there's many, many women who are very sensitive to the hunger signals, and our body, when it senses starvation, often turns up those hunger signals. And I think most women who've been part of the dieting culture know that feeling of under eating one day and then waking up the next day just starving. Your hunger signals are on overdrive. And so what ends up happening is that if you ignore that, then the body keeps sensing starvation. It often turns off the signals for fertility. So people will, and presumably in animal studies this has been shown, and I've seen patients, who have lost their period or get irregular periods when they're extensively fasting or doing some other kind of starvation diet. So I always recommend for women, especially if they have that history, to one, make sure that they're not dealing with anorexia, bulimia, that kind of issue. And then start with really short fasts, like 12 hours, like 13 hours. I mean, the studies on fasting, even just for intermittent fasting, just for 13 hours a night. So that would be like what I was talking about from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. are robust. There is a really great breast cancer study that showed that by fasting 13 hours nightly, women who had breast cancer had a 36% reduction in the recurrence of breast cancer if they fasted nightly for 13 hours versus the other group who did not fast. So you can see that you don't have to have these huge, extensive, long fasts to see amazing results. So any woman or man even who's jumping into this for the first time, I say start slow. Start with like 12 hours, which is, like you said, just extending a little bit of your nightly fast, and get comfortable with that over 2 or 3 weeks before you start to extend it a little bit more. And then if you experience any hormonal fluctuations, just stop and resume your normal pattern of eating.
Yeah, exactly. It truly could be for many people as simple as just don't eat after dinner, which is when, they say it's the least good for our metabolism anyway, to be eating, especially anything processed, but even to be eating late at night, because then your body's still digesting when you sleep. And I know I've seen the data that if you don't eat too close before bed, in that like 3 to 4 hour window before bed, then you are able to get more restful sleep. And I certainly noticed that with my own sleep tracking. If I don't eat for several hours, let my body digest before I sleep, I'm able to get more REM and more deep sleep than when I don't. This episode is sponsored by Crunchy Betty products. Here's a secret. While I have a post about making my own deodorant, I haven't actually done that in a couple of years because I found Crunchy Betty Kokomo Cream Deodorant, and I realized it works just as well. It doesn't cause irritation, and it's made by a small family business that I love to support. This deodorant smells like the tropics, and one small jar lasts for months, so it reduces packaging. I love that it uses this minimal recyclable packaging, and because it lasts so long, there's virtually no waste. For me, this deodorant completely stops any odor, keeps me fresh all day, even on heavy workout days. So many natural deodorants cause irritation, and this one doesn't. If you love tropical smells, and if you've been looking for a natural deodorant, you have got to check it out. There's 2 ways to order. You can check it out on Etsy by going to etsy.com/shop/Crunchy Betty, or on Amazon by going to crunchybetty.com/wellness mama. So again, that's CRUNCHYBETTY.com wellness mama. This episode is sponsored by Just Thrive Probiotics. I found this company when searching for the most research-backed and effective probiotic available, and I was blown away at the difference I found in their products. They offer 2 cornerstone products that are both clinically studied and highly effective. The first is their probiotic, which has been studied to help with leaky gut and to survive up to 1,000 times as much as other probiotics or as the beneficial organisms in something like Greek yogurt, for instance. The difference is their spore-based strains work completely differently than other types of probiotics. Their probiotic is vegan, dairy-free, histamine-free, non-GMO, and is made without soy, dairy, sugar, salt, corn, tree nuts, or gluten. So it's safe for practically everyone. I even sprinkle it in my kids' food or bake it into products because it can survive at really high temperatures. Their probiotic contains a patented strain called Bacillus indicus HU36, which produces antioxidants in the digestive system where they can be easily absorbed by the body. Their other product is a K2-7, and this is a nutrient you may have heard of. It's known as Activator X, a super nutrient that Weston A. Price, a dentist known primarily for his theories on the relationship between nutrition, good health, bone development, and oral health, found. He found that this is prevalent in foods in the healthiest communities in the world. The K2 from Just Thrive is the only pharmaceutical grade, all-natural supplement with published safety studies. Like the probiotic, it is also gluten, dairy, soy, nut, and GMO free, and best are both taken with food, so I keep both on my kitchen table. Here's a tip too. My dad has trouble remembering to take supplements, so he actually taped these to his pepper shaker because he uses that at practically every meal, and now they're on his daily supplement list as well. You can check out all their products and learn more by going to thriveprobiotic.com/wellness mama and using the code wellnessmama15 to save 15%. So again, that's Thrive Probiotic, ThriveProbiotic.com/wellness mama and the code wellnessmama15 to save 15%. I love also that you talked about variation, that you don't do the exact same thing every day. You, a couple days a week, mix it up with a little bit longer, which is great. I think it's good not to let our bodies get too adapted to doing a complete regimented thing every single day. And you mentioned that I do longer fasting, and I do. I'm actually just finishing up a 10-day fast, but I'll make sure I say on the record, I'm not encouraging anyone else to do that. I largely do it as much for the mental and emotional side as I do for the physical side. And I'm under the care of 2 doctors, my thyroid doctor and another doctor. And I've worked with the geneticist to know that I have a kind of unusual combination of genes that makes fasting pretty easy for me. So it's not something I recommend for everyone, but having had nodules on my thyroid before with Hashimoto's, it's something I look at like an insurance plan because of the autophagy that you mentioned that happens even overnight for us. Just it extends that window drastically. So I think that's such a good primer on fasting. So cool. And I love that you incorporate that in your life in a way that seems very easy and doable and probably is just part of your routine now.
Absolutely. I think that, the data for cancer, the data for metabolic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, and brain disease, Alzheimer's and dementia, is just so positive that it is enough for me to feel that fasting should be a part of many people's. I'm not saying it's the panacea. I'm not saying that every single person should be doing it, but I think that most people can benefit from some kind of fasting, or as I'm explaining, this kind of time restricted eating in a circadian pattern can be great because it downregulates your IGF-1, your mTOR pathway. These are all things that lead to cancer and other diseases. And we know through animal studies and also now through some human trials that intermittent fasting can be a very effective way of downregulating those cancer pathways.
Yeah, it's so cool what our bodies are capable of. Another topic I want to touch on lastly, I'll respect your time and not keep you forever, although I would talk to you all day, is plastic use. This is a soapbox I've been on recently. I did a lot of research on this over the last few months and just realizing how much plastic waste we have. Certainly there's a ton of health concerns, which I know that you can speak to, but even just to touch on the environmental side for a minute, like we literally have floating islands of plastic trash in the ocean bigger than the state of Texas, and they're killing millions of animals per year. And they expect by 2050, we're going to have more plastic than fish in the ocean. And we know from the health side, these compounds, especially when they start breaking down in our water, can have a really big impact. So I know as a mom and a doctor, this is something that you also speak about, but can you take us through some of the reasons why we all need to be avoiding plastic more and how to do that practically?
I think you're absolutely right. If we don't pay attention to our environment and our earth and the way we live our lives, I think we're putting ourselves in a situation where there's going to be irreversible damage to our earth and to our bodies. I really keenly became aware of this going to the developing country of India during this holiday break. And I honestly felt that I saw it so clearly where, the ocean side was polluted with plastic. You can see plastic coming up to the shore, and it's insane how our water supply is so ridden with plastic, and our food supply as well. So I highly recommend that besides the fact that, the BPA, for example, people think, BPA free is going to be safe, but BPA free plastics often have BPB and other BPs that are actually more toxic to our bodies than BPA. So I recommend that we reduce the amount of plastic in our lives drastically. And for example, some easy swaps that I have done in the last year is my children have these pouches that they take with zippers, and they're little pouches that you can put, grapes, or you can put any kind of snacks in them, and they're reusable and washable, and they're really great alternative to plastic Ziploc bags, which get warmed through the day and really leach out into the children's food. I also obviously metal water bottles and glass use is also a huge thing that people often are able to do. And I think in our children especially, I try to be careful about giving them their lunch foods in things that are covered in plastic, because often they're getting heated, or they're getting heat from just being out for a couple of hours. And we know that heat speeds up the leaching of these toxic compounds into our food. The other thing that we can be doing to improve our, plastic use is, when you have less waste, there's going to be less landfills. And I think, Katie, you've talked about doing things with less waste. And I think that's something that is just becoming a bigger issue now. It's not just about our own bodies. It's about these animals in the ocean. It's about our earth. It's about our cities and countries. We need to make this earth a sustainable, healthy place for our children and our children's children.
Exactly. And I can't believe our time has flown by already. There's a couple final questions I love to ask. The first being, do you have a book or any multiple books that have really had an influence on your life, and why?
Yes, I have two that I wanted to mention. One is The Hormone Cure by Sarah Gottfried, MD. She's a physician who inspired me when I was going through my own hormonal imbalance. So just like many women that I work with now, I had my own hormonal issues when I had my second child, and I was super busy starting a new practice, and I could not get any answers from any of my friends, any of my colleagues who were physicians. And I started doing my own reading on PubMed like you do, Katie. And then I read The Hormone Cure, which it just hit home for me and really inspired me to do much more of my own homework research and hypotheses. So I really thank her and thank that book. The other book that I really, really loved, and I read kind of at this similar time, was The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And I think that the thing that I loved about that book was that it motivated me to think outside the box in my career and about in my life. And I realized, hey, I can create a life and a career that I love and that can help many, many people. And I don't have to be in a box created by someone else.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ferriss's work as well. And then lastly, if there's a piece of advice that you could spread far and wide, what would it be and why?
I guess it goes along with the theme that we talked about today, is really respect nature, and the earth and incorporated it into your everyday life. I think that we've gotten so far from, with our technology and that we don't really need to interact with our earth and nature in a regular way anymore. But, all the things we talked about today, getting sunlight, intermittent fasting based on the sun and the moon, getting dirty in the garden, walking barefoot, those are daily practices that are easy and can really improve your health and the health of our earth.
I love it. And I totally agree. And I think we'll have to eventually maybe do a round two because you're such a wealth of knowledge and you're so fun to talk to. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a blast.
Katie, thank you so much. This has been so fun. I would love to.
And thank you to all of you for sharing your most valuable gift, your time with us. We don't take that lightly. We're very grateful for you. And I hope that you will join me again on the next episode of the Wellness Mama podcast. If you're enjoying these interviews, would you please take 2 minutes to leave a rating or review on iTunes for me? Doing this helps more people to find the podcast, which means even more moms and families can benefit from the information. I really appreciate your time, and thanks as always for listening.